Hello everyone, I'm Audrey Libosada from Marketing 3-2 and I'm going to discuss the book entitled Odd Girls and Twilight Lovers by Lillian Faderman. Let me first provide a brief introduction to this American author. According to the Evening Post, William Cullen Bryant was born on November 3, 1794 in Comington, Mass., United States. He died in June 12, 1878 in New York City. He was a poet of nature, best remembered for Thanatopsis and editor for 50 years of the New York Evening Post. He was one of the most popular of romantic poets to come out of America in the 19th century. He described a trip to Vermont in an essay in which he portrayed a beautiful female friendship between two revered maiden ladies as among nature's beauty. According to him, in their youthful days, they took each other as companions for life, and this union, no less sacred to them than the tie of marriage, has subsisted in uninterrupted harmony for 40 years, during which they have shared each other's occupation and pleasures and works of charity while in health and watched over each other tenderly in sickness. They slept on the same pillow and had a common purse and adopted each other's relations. And I would tell you of their wet dwelling, encircled with roses, and I would speak of the friendly attentions which their neighbors, people kind hearts and simple manners, seem to take pleasure in bestowing upon them. As can be seen from this example, as well as hundreds of others which have now been thoroughly documented by social historians, women's intimate relationships were universally encouraged in centuries past. Society placed certain restrictions on these relationships. Due to the fact that most of them live in a culture that denied women's autonomy in sexuality, many of them cultivated their own asexuality. Even though they may have kissed and hugged on the same pillow, their intimate relations never crossed the line to become sexually related. In any case, their ways of loving each other were no different from what the 20th century would describe with certainty as lesbian. The concept of love between two women was not well known during earlier times, so it is unlikely that such a description would have been possible. Before I proceed in discussing the book, let me explain and discuss to you some of the terminologies used. First one is lesbianism. It is a female sexual behavior directed toward people of the same sex or gender. Sexologist. It is a person who studied human sexual behavior. Gender dysphoria, a sense of unease because they are dissatisfied with the gender assigned at their birth. Modus operandi. It is a method of operation especially that indicates or suggests the work of a single criminal in more than one crime. Transsexual, it is a person who physically changed from male to female or vice versa. Heterosexual, it is a person sexually attracted to people of the opposite sex. Last one is essentialist. It is someone who follows the principles that objects have set of attributes that are necessary to their identity. Women's love for other females was an issue that dominated much of the 20th century and demanded answers and justifications that were unheard of until then. Women from our century, unlike their predecessors, are typically forced to react in one of four ways when passionately attached to another female. First one is she can see her own same sex attachment as completely unrelated to attachments between real lesbians. The sexologists who first identified lesbianism and brought it to public attention said that lesbians were abnormal or ill, men trapped in women's bodies, and she knew that she was not. Whether or not her relationship was sexual was insignificant. What was significant was that she could not, or she refused to, recognize her love for another woman in the sexologist's descriptions of lesbianism. Second is, she could become so fearful of her feelings toward other women, which were now seen as unnatural, that she would force herself to repress them altogether. They deny even to herself that she was capable of passionate attachment to another female. She would retrain her psyche, or society would help her do it, so that heteroaffectionality alone would be attracted to her. And even the mere notion of physical or emotional attachment between females, such as her grandmothers and their ancestors enjoyed as a matter of course, would be utterly repulsive to her. Third one is, she could become so fearful not of her own emotions but of her community's reaction to them, that she would spend her whole life in hiding in the closet, as the state came to be described in the mid 20th century, leading a double life, pretending to the world, to everyone but her female friend, that she was a stranger to the feelings that in fact claimed the better part of her emotional life. Last one is, she could accept the definitions of love between women that had been formulated by the sexologist and define herself as a lesbian. While such definitions would set her apart from the rest of womankind, even apart from other females who felt so differently emotionally and sometimes even physically about women that she did. They would also privilege her. Acceptance would mean that she could leave her attachment to women for the rest of her life without having to acknowledge that a heterosexual relationship had precedence over her same sex love. It would mean that she could, in fact, must seek ways to become an economically and socially independent human being, since she could not rely on male to support and defend her, and it would mean that she was free to seek out other women who also accepted such an identity and to form a lesbian subculture, such as could not have existed before love between women was defined as abnormal and unusual. In addition, the precious intimacies that adult females had been allowed to enjoy with each other earlier, sleeping in the same bed, holding hands, exchanging vows of eternal love, writing letters in the language of romance, became increasingly self conscious and then rare. The love between women in the late 20th century can no longer hide completely behind the veil of sexual innocence that characterized other centuries. Next is the concept of lesbian. Many women now find a lesbian identity to be viable, appropriate, and even healthy, whereas it was unattainable 100 years ago. As a result of the efforts of sexologists who attempted to separate women who continued to love other women from the rest of humanity, this identity was developed in the 20th century. As a matter of fact, it is the sexologists who were the first to construct the concept of the lesbian and called her into existence as part of a special category. Nevertheless, as the century progressed, women who identified themselves as lesbian began to have more and more freedom to change the definition of sexuologists to suit their own needs. So it has become increasingly clear to many women that the meaning of lesbianism has grown significantly beyond what the sexologists could have imagined and is now a phenomenon that involves lifestyle, ideologies, subcultures, and institutions far beyond what sexologists could have imagined. Lesbianism has nothing to do with morbidity. The definition of lesbianism adopted by earlier sexologists generally bear little resemblance to what these women are experiencing today. It is not related to gender dysphoria. For example, those who see themselves as men trapped in female bodies tend to identify as transsexuals rather than lesbians. And modern medical technology has also made it possible for them to alter their sexual orientation based on their self perception. So, who formulated the concept of homosexuality. So the 19th century sexologists who first formulated the concept of homosexuality were German Karl Westphal, Karl Ulrich, Richard von Krafft-Ebing. Their ideas were more quickly disseminated in Germany than anywhere else and permitted Germans to acknowledge they love the same sex to identify as a group sooner than those in other countries. Lesbian revolutions in the 1960s through 1970s. In the 1960s, however, marked a drastic change in America's attitude toward life. During the following decade, there were two major movements for the rights of women who love women that grew as a result of widespread interest in liberation and liberalization. One included gay women who were essentialists. They believe they were born gay or became so early. They believed that their problems were caused by society's attitudes toward homosexuality. There was also another group consisting of women who called themselves as lesbian feminists and who often believed that they had existentially chosen to be lesbians. For them, lesbianism was an integral component of the solution to the problems they had identified with society's attitude toward women. The women had practiced concealing themselves as maneuvering in spite of their handicaps throughout their adult lives, just as the times that had shaped them had required. They now resented the cavalier exhortation from the younger women, and not only they risked everything they had built, but they changed their very modus operandi, which had become second nature to them. Nevertheless, those who were fearful of coming out were often honest enough with themselves to realize that they owed the activists a debt. Lesbian and gay feminists made many more cautious women's lives easier through their revolutionary. In some ways, they felt safer or more comfortable even if it was not only in secret. Not only had the activists pushed policies and legislation on various levels that often meant that those covered lesbians no longer needed to fear they would be discriminated against in a job or in a school or with regard to housing, even should their sexual orientation become known. However, activists will also be able to reshape lesbian self images, which made shame about women's love anachronistic. Additionally, the activists succeeded in redefining the lesbian self image, thereby reducing this shame about love between women from feeling anachronistic. In spite of their fundamental differences, even covert lesbians enjoyed the benefits of both revolutionary movements. In the 1970s, gay revolutionaries viewed lesbians as an aggrieved minority justified in demanding rights that had been denied them since the sexologists first identified them in the previous century. Compared to this, lesbian feminist revolutionaries of the 1970s saw themselves as just like other women, except that they were more astute in their sociopolitical analysis, and they believed that once others recognized the light, they would also become lesbian feminists. While lesbian feminists and gay women revolutionaries were generally unwilling to accept the premise that love between women was inherently flawed. Unlike many lesbians who had been indoctrinated with guilt and self hatred in previous decades, it was an open battle against with that notion. In their opinion, society has a responsibility to take responsibility for its policies of discrimination and the dissemination of misinformation concerning same sex relationships. It is homophobia that needs to be cured, not homosexuality. According to them, society was the sick one, not lesbians. Again, this is your reporter, Audrey Leposada. Thank you for listening.